Hello and welcome to Money Matters. I'm your host, Melanie Ralph.
And I'm Ty Genwright. Here's what's coming up on today's show.
A big like for Facebook. Profits surge and shares reach an all-time high, all thanks to mobile advertising.
The electric car maker Tesla gets its vroom, even though it's posted its biggest loss in nearly 3 years.
Plus, turning mud into money. How people of Java, Indonesia, are making a living out of disaster.
Well, let's get straight now to our top story. And Facebook is scooping up the dollars with a whopping 41% rise in revenues and a massive 1.5 billion users all over the world. For more on that story, we're joined now by TRT World reporter Elena Casas. Elena.
Thank you, Ty. Well, what's interesting about these amazing figures coming out of Facebook is that 78% of their revenues are coming from mobile advertising. And that's a market that almost nobody else is managing to monetize. And other companies who've got an online presence are starting to panic that they're just not managing to pick that advertising up and that they're having to make deals with Facebook instead. For example, in parts of sub-Saharan Africa where people have poor internet connections generally, Facebook is launching its own satellites, which are going to allow people to connect on their mobiles cheaply, but only if they access all of the internet via Facebook, giving them a kind of monopoly. And here in the developed world, that could soon start happening with news stories. Next week, Facebook's launching a new app called Notify, which relies on deals that it's made with news companies, which are going to allow people to access their content via Facebook. But of course, that means that all the advertising revenue is going to Facebook, whereas of course, news sites are dependent on being able to make up some of their own advertising revenue. So many of them are really concerned. They're thinking about moving towards paid subscription models or forcing people to pay per article, for example, because this advertising revenue, which has allowed some news sites to stay alive, at least while people are accessing them on desktop computers, is really being hit hard by the switch to people accessing their internet on their mobiles, because there are so many mobile ad blocking apps that allow people to keep away from them. Now, this mobile advertising market is worth more than $14 billion a year, but anyone other than Facebook is finding it hard to monetize that. I went to find out how some users and companies are adapting. Advertising is all around us, on billboards, on buses and on our phones. But for many of us, it's just too much.
You're trying to do something, a job that's usually quite quick when you're on the internet, but you get flooded with lots of different types of advertising.
A large amount of it is stuff that's deliberately designed to pop up in front of you and get in the way of whatever you're trying to do.
I guess I just kind of ignore it now because it's everywhere and you're not on a website to see the advertising, you're on a website to find the information you were looking for, so I just ignore it.
For users of Apple's iPhone, the end of annoying ads could be at hand. The company's latest iOS 9 operating system allows apps that block banner and pop-up ads, and 12,000 people downloaded one in just 24 hours. Apple, as a hardware company, doesn't need to make money from advertising, but for publishers who do, its latest move could be catastrophic. Consumers have always tried to avoid ads, of course, and the industry needs to come up with new ways to catch them.
If you're relying on advertising, you want to be able to deliver ads to all of those people, all of the people who come to your site. So any kind of ad blocking is bad for business. So I think a lot of news publishers are thinking about the kinds of ads that they serve to their users and trying to make sure that they're not blocked.
This is my crib, and these are my babes.
One way of doing that is to make video ads so entertaining people don't want to block them, like this rap with a twist from Fiat. Another is to bring people to your site via online giants like Google or Facebook. Blocking software generally lets ads from these trusted platforms through. That raises the fear that if websites don't work with them, they won't attract any advertising cash at all.
Already a huge amount, potentially around a half of ad spend in the mobile space goes to either Google or Facebook. Now, the paradox in ad blocking is that actually what it does, it limits the amount of content that consumers are eventually going to be able to see.
To survive online, many websites will have to persuade their readers that ads might be irritating, but they're the only way news can be paid for.
Well, it certainly is interesting. I mean, the whole business model of the internet may be under threat. Anyone could go out there and make a living from it, and now possibly that's turning around.
Yeah, but it does seem like the big publishers are coming on side now, isn't it? The ad blocking is being seen as just that, a threat to the free internet. But I mean, the whole internet economy is changing. I mean, recently the leading tabloid newspaper here in Britain, The Sun, abandoned its paywall, which had only relatively recently introduced. So clearly some people are willing to pay for content. The FTs of this world, people who read the Financial Times and the like, that has a very successful paywall. But in other parts of the market, people simply aren't willing to
Certainly
to pay.
Still one to keep a lookout for. Well, now time to catch up with some of the rest of the day's top business news. Germany will retest all Volkswagen car models to gauge their genuine emissions levels after new revelations from the car maker 6 weeks into its biggest ever corporate scandal pushed the government to act. The government says that all current models sold under the VW, Audi, Skoda and Seat brands with both diesel and petrol engines will be tested for carbon dioxide and nitrogen dioxide emissions. The announcement followed a VW statement on Tuesday that it had understated emissions levels in around 800,000 cars sold mainly in Europe.
The budget airline EasyJet has reported a significant increase in passengers for October, with numbers up just shy of 10%. Earlier this week, its rival Ryanair nudged up its annual profit forecast after what it called a bumper summer. It said fuller planes would take profits to the upper end of its previously estimated range.
German sportswear company Adidas has raised its outlook for full-year sales and profits following strong third-quarter results. Its reported sales rose 18% to around 4.7 billion euros, beating an average analyst forecast for 4.5 billion euros. It all reported its golf business had recovered from a recent slump.
Well, let's talk about those stories and all the top stories of the day. We're joined in studio by Matthew Gwither, the editor of the magazine Management Today. Thanks for coming into us, Matthew. Let's start by talking about Facebook, shall we? It's not too long since Facebook's foray into the mobile world was being deemed as somewhat of a failure. They weren't managing to cram the ads in the same ways they were on a full computer screen. Now it seems they've got it right.
Yeah, it would appear so. I mean, I don't see all that many of them when I'm putting pictures of my kids up on Facebook. I think in the long run, the worry with Facebook would be how fickle young people are where it comes to the internet and social media, how something can be incredibly hot one moment and then the next they're on to something else entirely. And certainly I have a 20-year-old and I can't remember the last time he was ever seen on Facebook. He's already on to the next thing now. But they've got such a bulky presence now in that market. And, middle-aged people putting pictures of their kids up might be fine for them.
It just seems like they've weathered the storm, haven't they? Where have they gone right and so many other internet companies gone wrong?
You mean Twitter? I can't understand Twitter not really working because I do think it's one of the most wonderful things ever created and it suits our purpose on Management Today, getting our stuff out there to our content out there to our readers. It's very difficult, isn't it? There's a relatively low price of entry still into these things, and Twitter clearly spent vast amounts of money and is not getting sufficient revenue back. What will be the next thing? Who knows? I wish I knew what it might be.
Well, Facebook's already in the market, isn't it? Because they own Instagram. They bought Instagram. Yeah. That seems to be the hit with all the kids these days. They bought WhatsApp recently. Yeah. They were circling. I don't think they actually made a bid for Snapchat. Isn't that right? But I suppose fingers in many pies. Let's talk about Adidas now. They've put out some fairly good figures. Seem to be having no problem at all selling in China. And it's not that long since Nike said something similar. They said you'd swear there's nothing actually wrong in China right now. Some companies don't seem to be immune from this downturn.
Well, I think it's different if you're trying to sell Bentleys, luxury cars, Prada, things like that in China, and not very low-cost ticket items like Adidas and Nike make, but maybe they simply can't do without their sports shoes. One of the things that really interests me is with the FIFA scandal, is that ever going to kind of impact on the sales of companies who have very strong associations with them? And it could be that despite all the bad news coming out of FIFA, the consumers, the people who watch sport on TV, don't really mind all that much. It's something for the chattering classes and for us to talk about here, but actually when it comes to shifting product at the end of the day, it doesn't have an adverse effect on them.
And just switching gears slightly, we're going to the skies, and we've heard earlier that Ryanair and the low-cost air carriers are doing quite well. The question now is, again, that business model. How do the other more standard carriers compete with such a low-cost business model?
Sure. I mean, what's interesting in the airline business is there's sort of an equilibrium now, isn't there? You would have thought with the low cost coming on so strong that IAG, British Airways, would be suffering, but their numbers look pretty good as well. There are a lot of people who want to travel by air around the world at the moment, and there seems to be room for everybody. The last time I travelled on EasyJet, Ryanair, the planes were 95% full, even at sort of 10:30 on a Saturday evening. There's such demand in the market there, and with fuel costs so low, there must be room for further expansion. I mean, I think it's a worry for EasyJet, the news yesterday about Sharm el-Sheikh.
Yes.
They fly down there. Security is a huge issue for them. But at the moment, you know, Carolyn McCall, who runs that organisation, is having a storming time.
The other interesting thing is, you know, with low cost versus legacy carriers, is they're kind of meeting in the middle. Ryanair is suddenly going all posh, and you've got BA selling £39 one-way fares as long as you don't take a bag with you.
Yeah.
It's almost like they're finding a middle ground.
What will be fascinating would be the point at which the low costs start going across the Atlantic or long haul and start trying to sell kind of bigger ticket, club class and even first class tickets where there is an amazing margin. I don't think they're ready for that at the moment, but when it comes, then maybe start introducing customer loyalty programs. I mean, Michael O'Leary of Ryanair always said, over my dead body will I ever do that? But they're amazingly effective at keeping business folk tied to one airline because they love their miles.
Matthew Gwither from Management Today, thank you very much for that.
Now, the electric car maker Tesla is powering ahead. The stock rose to an all-time record on Wall Street, even though the company made a huge loss.
And the reason is that Tesla is managing to shift a relatively healthy number of cars despite their high prices. Fred Kachiyama has this report.
It's vroom for Tesla. After a strong rollout of the Model X sport utility, the company vowed Tuesday to speed up production of its electric cars. That turbocharged Tesla's stock on Wednesday, even though the company posted its biggest loss in 10 quarters. The electric car maker says it's getting more orders for both the luxury crossover Model X and the 3-year-old Model S sedan. And CEO Elon Musk said he sees the company ramping up the production rate to several hundred vehicles per week next month. Analysts say they're relieved that orders of the X are not cannibalizing those of the S. Tesla started delivering the Model X Signature Series, a premium version of the SUV, in September. It's now working on unveiling a new mass-market car called Model 3 in March. That car will cost about $35,000 and will be in production in about 2 years.
Well, sticking with cars, and Toyota has cut its forecast for sales, largely due to uncertain economies in emerging markets. Even so, though, the car maker reported operating profits of nearly $7 billion in the last 3 months, making it one of the world's most profitable companies. The number was flattered, though, by a series of cost cuts and a weaker yen. Toyota has now retrieved its crown as the world's biggest car maker from Volkswagen, which not surprisingly has seen sales plunge over the last 2 months. Certainly lots to talk about in the automotive world. Volkswagen, a case in point, as the crisis goes from bad to worse. To talk about all this, Steve Fowler, editor of Auto Express, has come into studio with us. Thank you, Steve. China is a big problem, I'm guessing, for Toyota?
For Toyota and pretty much every manufacturer that's selling cars in China at the moment. Of course, the market in China is still growing, but the rate of growth has slowed dramatically, and a lot of the manufacturers have forecasted or set their forecasts at high levels of growth. When that slows, they catch a cold, and that's the same particularly for luxury brands, and of course Toyota has Lexus.
We've got to talk about VW. What a terrible time they've had recently. Yep. The big question, I suppose, that I need to ask you as an expert in the industry is, can they recover?
I think they can recover, and they will recover eventually. The bottom line is they make cars that people want to buy. The problem is also people these days have long memories, particularly in the US market, which is absolutely crucial for Volkswagen. It takes a long time for them to recover from bad publicity over there. I think at the moment a lot of people are still worried about whether they should be buying a Volkswagen. A lot of Volkswagen owners are very upset and angry at the way that this lack of information seems to just dribble out. And the latest information that there's 800,000 cars with irregularities in CO2 figures, that's all we've been told so far. So we don't know what cars. A lot of people out there who, again, confused, just don't know.
Their sales have fallen, but if I as a consumer decided I want to buy myself a Volkswagen and I go out to my local dealer, will I get a better deal? Is there any evidence of that? Are the prices coming down?
Well, we've certainly seen sales fall. Only today in the UK, the sales figures for October have been released, and Volkswagen have reported a drop of 9.8%. So it's clear car sales aren't what they were. When car sales aren't what they were, and when dealers are slow, the chances are you can go in there and haggle for a better deal than you might otherwise have done so. It's undoubted that there's no doubt in the fact that people aren't buying Volkswagens as they were earlier in the year. So the chances, if you do want a Volkswagen, you could get a good deal.
What does VW need to do to reassure their market that they're going to be the company they should be?
Well, I think it's starting to do the right things, and it's starting with a degree of honesty. Now, that degree of honesty brings other problems. As we've said, they've just made an announcement that 800,000 other cars are affected. They wanted to get that announcement out because they wanted to control that announcement and make sure it didn't leak and look bad. But in doing that, they haven't got any more information to tell us. So being honest, that's the first point that they've got to do. I think they've got to be clear about some form of compensation for people. At the moment, we don't know what effect these recalls will have on the cars when they do start to get amended, and Volkswagen needs to be clear about that and what they will do for their customers.
Well, let's park VW and its increasingly toxic brand and talk about a very popular new brand. Tesla seems to be doing very well for itself, although I can't say I've seen too many of them actually out and about on the streets.
They're an increasing number, particularly if you go to somewhere like Norway, where there's a huge incentive to buy these sort of cars. But they are growing. Of course, Tesla as a company, not making money. Elon Musk, the CEO, will admit that. But right car at the right time. We've seen a huge increase on our websites of people looking at alternatively fueled cars, electric cars and hybrids. And Tesla have got one of the best on the market. So as I say, it's the right car at the right time. And there's a degree of sexiness about them. It's the, if you like, the Apple of cars at the moment. Apple rumoured to be making a car eventually themselves. But there's no surprise really that sales are going so well.
I mean, the key thing for me as a consumer possibly of an electric car is I'd be worried about being able to charge it. There just doesn't seem to be the infrastructure in place to support the growth of the electric car market.
You're right, that is a big issue. Tesla has addressed that by having its own charging network, although it's not exactly a huge charging network, but the difference with Teslas is you can go at least a couple of 100 miles. But with other electric cars, things like the Nissan Leaf, Renault Zoe and cars like that, you're right, the charging infrastructure just isn't there yet. It's growing, but whether that's growing quickly enough for you as a consumer remains to be seen. Range anxiety is, of course, the big issue. If you've got a charging point at home, you'd be better off.
Steve Fowler, editor of Auto Express, thank you very much for coming into us.
Now, as we've said previously on this programme, the world is getting ready for the first set of interest rate hikes in 6 years. It's a moot point for many homeowners, savers and consumers alike. Mortgages will go up, rents will probably rise, and consumers may find goods in the shops more expensive.
Today, it's the turn of the Bank of England to make its decision and also give its forecast for UK growth and inflation. Economists call it Super Thursday. Well, most policymakers have been in favour of keeping things as they are. There are one or two who may be disposed to an early rate rise. Well, joining us here in the studio is Nick Beecroft, founder of HP Economics. Thank you for coming into us, Nick. Do you think there's an eagerness, not just on the part of the Bank of England, but on the part of the Fed and other central banks, to get the ball rolling on interest rate hikes, to suggest that, you know, normality has been restored after the financial crisis?
I think it's a difficult time to be a central banker. They are usually classically trained economists, and therefore all of the training, every fibre in the body probably says that after 6 or 7 years of interest rates near zero, there's the danger of creating bubbles, too much liquidity in parts of the economy where one doesn't need it, and every part of their being may think it's time to raise rates. On the other hand, there are huge challenges that would mitigate against doing that, and it's a very difficult balancing act, the unprecedented balancing act that they have to manage given the unprecedented nature of the crisis that we went through.
So what are those challenges that you feel the UK is facing at the moment?
A lot of them are externally created. Maybe that's self-evident given that we're the best or the second best performing major economy in the world with something like 2.5% growth. But there are significant headwinds coming from overseas, from the Eurozone, from China and from other emerging markets, Brazil, Russia, all suffering major problems at the moment. And with it, exporting deflation to Britain and to America and many other parts of the developed markets.
So if you had a seat on the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England, were voting, what way would you be voting?
I wouldn't be voting for a rate rise. I think those external dangers are too large. We are in the midst of a full-blown currency war. Central bankers never speak its name because often it's not their remit to control currencies. It certainly isn't in the case of the Bank of England or the ECB or the Fed for that matter. They all say that they take it into account, though, and take into account they must. We've seen China devalue its currency a little bit this year. Other countries are carefully managing the currency, including the ECB in Europe, and would like to see them lower to avoid the prospect of deflation. So that's uppermost in their mind, and that's one of the key reasons I think they'll hold off, especially until the Fed raises rates.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's hop over the pond and talk about the Fed rate rise. A different talk behind the last speech there from the Fed, different rhetoric about looking at the labour market there as opposed to the macroeconomic pressures. When do you see the Fed raising rates? Will it be next month? And will it make much difference if it's only a tiny increment?
Personally, I still feel it won't be next month. I think through all this we have to remember that despite talking tough on the last couple of occasions, Yellen has always been in the more dovish camp. The other key member of the committee, Dudley, the president of the New York Fed, permanent voting member, is also rather dovish and will be keen not to incur the risks that I mentioned with regard to the Bank of England as well. They face almost exactly the same concerns. A reasonably good labour market, but zero or negative inflation. And I think the reason these guys may hold off as well is once again, common to the Bank of England, they expect inflation, headline inflation, to rise in January when the so-called base effect of the oil price declines from a year ago disappears. If it doesn't, they're in trouble.
OK, Nick Beecroft from HB Economics, thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
Still to come, back in business, we take a look at the island turning misfortune into money. Now, it's not everyone who can turn a natural disaster into a business opportunity, but some people of the island of Java in Indonesia have done just that.
Residents of villages buried beneath the sea of volcanic mud nearly a decade ago are now making a living from tourists drawn to see the disaster zone. Paul Chapman has this report.
Nearly a decade ago, Sumono lived in a village and worked at a local drinks factory on Java Island in Indonesia. His seemingly ordinary life vanished in 2006 when the whole area was buried beneath a flood of volcanic mud. Now he's one of the motorcycle guides making around $2 a trip, ferrying curious tourists to view the scene of the disaster and the still spewing volcano.
If I said it's not enough, it's true. It's not enough, but we are grateful for any work we can get.
When the volcano began pouring mud, it was peaking at around 150,000 cubic meters a day. Tens of thousands of people were displaced. The mud covers hundreds of hectares in the eastern end of the island. Some of Sumono's clients are domestic tourists, part of a growing number drawn to the scenes of such natural disasters.
Untuk pertama kalinya saya datang ke Lumpur Lapindo. Sebelumnya sudah sering mengikuti beritanya ya di televisi.
This is the first time I've come to Lapindo mud. I watched a lot of the news on television, but I didn't expect that seeing it with my own eyes could give such a different impression, as I imagined 13 villages underneath the mud and it's still erupting. That means there's a risk other villages could be buried too. If this is called tourism, I suppose it's tragic tourism, as we can see the threat.
Kalau ini disebut wisata ya, istilahnya wisata yang menyedihkan juga karena kita akan melihat ancaman di sini.
Indonesia's government is helping to compensate those who lost their homes, but even now officials say 10% have yet to be paid. Statues have sprung up at the scene of the disaster, which some blame on oil and gas drilling by a company linked to the powerful Bakri family. They deny any wrongdoing, but among the statues there's an effigy of its patriarch near a stone tomb bearing the inscription, "Let this nation not forget."
That's almost it, but let's remind you of our top stories. A spike in mobile users and advertising has lifted Facebook's stock to an all-time high. The world's biggest social media network has posted a 41% rise in revenues.
Germany will retest all Volkswagen car models to gauge their genuine emissions levels after new revelations from the car maker.
That's it from us for now. We'll be back later in the day with the top business stories making headlines around the world. I'm Ty Genwright.
I'm Melanie Ralph, and this is Money Matters.
Goodbye.